wanted to talk about STEMI around the world and ACC's Global Heart Attack Treatment Initiative. I have no disclosures. So you've seen this slide probably several times during this meeting, and we continue to see it, but it's so classic, showing the wave front of myocardial cell death with infarction, and also, as you know, on the left on the graph, that most of the salvage occurs within the first 4 to maybe 6 hours, but we're finding out more and more that there is incremental gain up to 12 hours and maybe even out to 48 hours. But there's also some information about the open infarct related benefits as well. And I think we're all very familiar with the best way to treat STEMIs, which is fast, and these are some of the top 10 lessons that we've put together over the last 20 years, but the key part that we all continue to repeat as our mantra is time is muscle, and at a similar time occurrence, PCI is superior in outcomes to thrombolytic therapy, and then really number 3 through 10 are all about multiple strategies to try and speed the patient to the cath lab. And also, now that we know on number 10, door to balloon time is no longer the measure to watch. We really need to look at the total ischemia time. Now, from the ACC-AHA, we now have pretty complete STEMI coverage in the U.S. with over 85% of the population covered by a STEMI system as of last year. And as of 2017, the announcement from the NCDR data was that more than 93% of patients were having their arteries opened within the U.S. within the recommended 90 minutes of arrival. So it sounded like we were doing great, patting ourselves on the back and so forth. But then, of course, COVID happened, and that set everyone back worldwide. And just recently at the American Heart Association, a colleague of mine, Dr. Jollis, presented the Get With the Guidelines data over the past 2 years during the pandemic, which showed, unfortunately, that we were going backwards. And I'll just read the highlight that in the second quarter of 2018, pre-pandemic, there was a median time to treatment of 91 minutes. And then 86 minutes in the second quarter of 2018, and that increased to 91 minutes during the peak of the pandemic. And then likewise, that resulted in a worsening mortality of 5.6% in 2018 up to 8.7% in 2021 throughout the entire NCDR database of STEMI. So we were going backwards. So we need to have that as a call to arms to try and repurpose ourselves and get back the type of fast treatment of MIs that we had prior to the pandemic. And this is just a quick review of the European guidelines in 2017, which are very similar to the ACC-AHA guidelines of 2014, with the idea that you set up rapid, efficient STEMI systems of care. And I think the most important difference is that the guidelines are actually a little more stringent with ESC, recommending that first medical contact in PCI hospitals should be less than 60 minutes, and for those that are being transferred, less than 90 minutes, as opposed to the 90 and 120 minutes in the ACC-AHA criteria. So a good example, I think maybe one of the best examples of large systems of care were the Accelerator 1 and Accelerator 2 studies that were done in the U.S. with Accelerator 2, overall 600 hospitals in 12 metro regions with over 30 million lives covered and over 20,000 STEMIs in an 18-month period. And the idea was in those systems of care that we were looking at a goal of first EMS medical contact or from a non-PCI center door to device of 90 or 120 minutes respectively for over 3/4 of the patients. And we were able to achieve those improvements with systems of care in those metro centers. And as you can see, green, increasing green from the baseline to final is obviously better with faster activation and decreased emergency department dwell times. And how that resulted on the bottom two rows, or the last row, was in-hospital death was reduced by 50% from 4.4 down to 2.3%, and heart failure at discharge was reduced by a third down to 5%. So great outcomes in that study, and compared to the NCDR database, the red line on top, with already a good in-hospital mortality of 4% for STEMI across the nation, that was reduced down to below 3%. So this is a talk about STEMI around the world. And so let's start with the largest country, China, with 1.5 billion people. And information sometimes can be difficult coming out of China, but probably the best example or the best information we have across the board is from the Peace study, somewhat dated, but in that study, unfortunately in time frames of 2001 to 2011, more than a decade ago, they were showing that nearly half of their patients were receiving no reperfusion therapy whatsoever in this large database. And in those that did receive reperfusion, half were thrombolytic and only a quarter were PCI. And that unfortunately resulted in mortalities across the board from about 10 to 20%. How about India? You all are doing extremely well. STEMI India, headed by Dr. Alexander and Dr. Mulasari, has been an excellent program. And you can see the 3 states in green where there's active STEMI system of care with good results that I'll show you on the next slide, as well as the others in orange and yellow, which are halted somewhat by the pandemic, but are coming back online, hopefully, in the near future. And that uses a traditional hub and spoke process of gradually accelerating intensity of care. And they were able to show a reduction in mortality of 17.6% down to 14% with their STEMI India project, and also the increased usage of primarily a pharmacoinvasive approach from 46% up to 63% in that study, and that's continuing and ongoing. And a unique feature that is probably not going on so much, but several years ago in Bangalore, they tried putting paramedics on scooters with thrombolytic injection and going through, white lining through traffic to get to the patients and to treat them in the home, and then let the ambulance come and bring them to definitive care in the hospital at a leisurely pace. So it really begets a question about how do we count times like door to balloon or ischemia time in these mega cities that we have around the world of more than 20 million or so, like in Cairo, where this type of traffic situation is often commonly seen. And that is one of the major barriers. But as you can see, we already have now 14 new sites in Egypt in the Global Heart Attack Program, which I will describe here in just a minute. Africa, a huge objective with over 1.4 billion people. There are 54 countries, only 20 have cath labs, less than half. There are 2,000 cardiologists in Africa. That's total cardiologists. Now, I don't even know what portion are interventional cardiologists. New York State has nearly 2,500 cardiologists itself. And as we know, cardiovascular disease continues to be the leading cause of death in low and middle income countries and in Africa. One area that we have a Gotti site in is in Kenya, which has over 50 million people and is large by world standards, but there are only 7 PCI facilities in Nairobi and only 1 in Mombasa. About the Hajj, this is the largest gathering of mankind each year in Mecca with, we don't have exact estimates, but certainly greater than 2 million people in a 2-week period, usually in late summer. And it's estimated there are about 700 STEMIs in that elderly population that makes it there during that 2-week period. And there's been some work with the Saudis to think about a mobile cath lab to go to that area during that time, since those people don't want to leave, in this after making that life's journey. And then in the other mega cities like Sao Paulo, they actually have it work the other way, where patients with STEMI in rural areas actually come to the outskirts of Sao Paulo, and then a helicopter meets them there and flies to the top of Einstein and some of the other super hospitals to render fast care for these patients. So many different ways to try and take care of this. I'll give you a quick, unusual late presenter STEMI case from Dr. Fong that provided me from Borneo, Malaysia, a native lady in her 50s. She developed chest pain around midnight on a Friday. Her village was upriver from the nearest district hospital, and it was dark. There was no one to bring her to the hospital. The only method was by longboat downriver. At sunrise, the boatman took her downriver to Capet Hospital. She was still conscious but having chest pain. When she arrived at the boat jetty, she suffered a cardiac arrest. She was given bystander CPR at the riverside and quickly brought to the hospital, where she was diagnosed with VFib on the cardiac monitor and promptly defibrillated. She subsequently became hemodynamically unstable, required inotropes, then had another VF arrest and was again defibrillated. A medevac helicopter was dispatched, brought her to the cardiac center in Kuching, where she was received, and she was brought straight to the cath lab and successfully had stenting of her occluded dominant right coronary, and surprisingly recovered well during the weekend and was back at her village the following Thursday. And this is the picture of the longboat. I don't have the lady in it, but this was the picture of what she rode down in flat as her means of transport. And then, as you can see on this map, going right to left, she had the 1 hour by longboat, then received the 1.5 hour helicopter flight to the tertiary center, where she got definitive care and survived. So STEMI guidelines for low and middle income countries are different. The burden of cardiovascular disease in general, and STEMI in particular, is increasing. They hold 80% of the world population, or about nearly 6 billion people. Inaccurate estimates of STEMI occurrence are lacking, but seem to be upwards of 3 million cases, and outcomes remain dismal in these areas. You can see here cardiovascular events rates on the top and annualized case fatality rates on the bottom. The green bars are the high income countries, and then the blue and gold bars are the low and middle income countries. And particularly if you concentrate on the bottom row, you can see how there is a significant increased case fatality rate for myocardial infarction in these low and middle income countries, as well as other major cardiovascular disease problems. So the regional systems of care for these STEMI are virtually non-existent in these areas, and as I showed you, cardiac cath labs are inadequate and almost always clustered in urban locations. There's poor transportation infrastructure and lack of adequately trained paramedics, and there's lack of resources and insurance coverage for the majority of the population, and so outcomes for these patients are much worse in these low and middle income countries. One possible solution is this international reperfusion strategy from the STREAM investigators and others of a pharmacoinvasive approach, which basically is if they can't receive PCI, as we know, in less than 120 minutes, then they should get thrombolytic and then be transferred to a PCI center as soon as able for definitive care, particularly if they need rescue PCI. And again, the whole plan is similar to the STEMI India program of having various facility levels according to what's available at that clinic. In some places, EKG is not even available. The next higher level in orange might be one with thrombolytic therapy, and then finally to transfer to a level 4 facility that's PCI capable. And this was outlined by multiple authors, including myself and Jagat Narula in Circulation 2020. So Global Heart Attack Treatment Initiative, quickly, again, is looking at the over 75% of cardiovascular deaths that take place in low and middle income countries. And we presented this at ACC 23 this past spring in Washington. And again, the over 3 million STEMIs that occur in these low and middle income countries, trying to gather data and then put in systems of care. This is our current map with over 39 sites in 18 countries. And as you can see, we have one with Dr. Jacob Paul here in India, and we're looking to add on more and gather the data. And the data elements then are derived from a short form of the chest pain MI registry, and those are gathered with patient health information, which is completely anonymized and protected. And we serve as a resource for the guidelines for the hospitals and had a rolling 4-quarter to see about their change. And over 4,000 patients were reported. Smaller number of females, 19.5%. High number of smokers, 35%. Cardiogenic shock on arrival, 10%, and cardiac arrest before intervention, 5%, both high, probably related to delay in treatment. The box and whisker graphs for the combined endpoints, plus the those in terms of the mortality, and the overall was from the first to the last quarter. Over those 2-year period, the combined endpoints improved, outcomes of over 3% with implementing the Gotti registry and a resource in these centers. And we reduced mortality by nearly 2%. And again, we also improved the systems of care in terms of the first medical contact mean was 70%, less than 90 minutes. And that could be pharmacoinvasive, of course. That was about half of the patients. But more than 90% received reperfusion therapy. Nearly 9% had documentation of their ejection fraction by echo prior to discharge. And nearly 90% received guideline-directed medical therapy. So the conclusion with Gotti is that it's a global contemporary registry that's growing, successfully enrolling STEMI patients in countries generally unfamiliar with quality improvement metrics, and important trends of clinical parameter improvement have been shown with this process. If you measure it, you can improve it. And we're hoping that Gotti may facilitate the implementation of policies aimed at enhancing outcomes of cardiovascular disease worldwide. So thank you very much for this.